If you were walking alone and heard a frantic dog barking at you, would you trust your instincts or walk away? Emily Parker, 8 months pregnant and already exhausted from a long shift at the diner, just wanted to make it home before dark. She shuffled down the quiet road in her small Vermont town, her swollen ankles aching with every step. But just as she passed the abandoned lot near Maple Street, a sharp, desperate barking shattered the silence. The sound was piercing, wild, almost pleading, forcing Emily to freeze in her tracks. She turned and saw a medium-sized mutt, muddy and shaking, darting back and forth near a crumbling fence. His barks weren't angry. They were frantic, almost terrified, as if trying to warn her about something unseen. Emily clutched her belly instinctively, her heart hammering against her ribs as fear and curiosity battled inside her. Most nights, Emily would have hurried away without a second thought, especially after everything she had endured in the past year. Losing her husband in a car accident had left her fragile and wary. But tonight, something in the dog's eyes rooted her to the spot, a raw fear that mirrored her own loneliness. The wind picked up, carrying a low, broken whine from the animal that pierced straight through her defenses. For a moment, it was as if the whole world had narrowed down to this trembling creature and her pounding heart. Torn between fear for her unborn child and the unshakable pull to help, Emily took a cautious step toward the dog. As she did, the animal yelped and darted toward the woods, stopping to look back at her as if begging her to follow. She hesitated, scanning the darkening tree line, every survival instinct screaming at her to stay on the road. But her feet betrayed her mind, inching forward, driven by something deeper than logic, an aching need to not feel so alone. The deeper Emily went into the woods, the colder the air grew, and the more her doubts gnawed at her. Twigs snapped under her sneakers, and the heavy silence, broken only by the dog's urgent whines, pressed down on her like a weight. She thought about her baby, about how reckless she was being, but something in her gut whispered that this wasn't just about a stray dog. It was about a choice, one that would change everything. The dog suddenly stopped at a large tree with roots gnarled like old hands gripping the earth. He barked furiously at the base of it, digging at the frozen ground with frantic paws. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she strained to see through the shadows, every muscle in her body tense with anticipation. Then she heard a sound so faint and broken it almost didn't register. A whimper. Not from the dog, from something else. Her heart nearly stopped as she stepped closer and realized the ground had given way into a shallow pit, half covered by leaves and broken branches. She stumbled forward, barely catching herself, and peered inside. The dim light revealed a shape, a tiny hand poking out from a tangle of dirty blankets. A real, living baby, gasping weakly in the frigid air. For a split second, Emily's mind went blank, refusing to believe what her eyes were seeing. The dog whimpered again, nuzzling her side as if begging her to hurry. Shaking all over, she dropped to her knees, ignoring the stabbing pain shooting up her legs, and reached into the pit. The tiny body was ice-cold and frighteningly still, wrapped in a thin quincy stained with dirt. Tears blurred Emily's vision as she fumbled with her phone, trying to call for help with shaking fingers. Every second felt like an eternity as the baby gave another feeble cry, its voice a ghost of what it should have been. The dog barked again, louder this time, snapping Emily out of her panic. She pressed the phone to her ear, praying someone would answer before it was too late. But deep down, even as the dispatcher's voice crackled through the line, Emily knew the truth. The baby's skin was far too cold, the cries too faint, the breaths too shallow. The dog sat beside her, head bowed low, as if mourning. And Emily, clutching the tiny body against her chest, realized that sometimes even the purest acts of love arrive a few heartbeats too late. Emily barely registered the flashing lights as 2 patrol cars skidded to a stop at the edge of the woods. She sat in the dirt, cradling the limp baby in her arms, rocking back and forth in a motion so instinctive it broke the hearts of the arriving officers. Officer Daniels, a father of 3 himself, knelt down carefully, his face crumpling at the sight. The dog growled low, protective, not letting anyone too close to Emily or the bundle she held. One of the paramedics pried the infant gently from Emily's arms, their gloved hands moving quickly to assess. Emily couldn't stop shaking, watching helplessly as they began CPR, the tiny chest barely rising under the desperate compressions. She clutched the dog's fur, grounding herself as her mind raced through 1,000 prayers. The woods around them, once silent, now pulsed with the desperate sounds of sirens and shouted orders. The police tried to question Emily, but she couldn't find her voice. All she could do was point at the dog. Officer Daniels followed her trembling hand, watching as the muddy creature limped to a small thicket nearby, barking hoarsely. They pushed through the brush and found something worse, an abandoned duffel bag, bloodied and soaked, half buried in the dirt. Inside, they discovered more baby clothes and a note. The note was scrawled in frantic handwriting. "I can't do this anymore. Please forgive me." It was a mother's final, broken cry for help, and it hollowed out everyone who read it. The officers looked at each other, the gravity of what had almost been lost settling heavily on their shoulders. Back near the tree, Emily watched as the paramedics fought to pull the baby back from the brink of death. The dog's whines grew louder, more panicked, until Emily realized he wasn't just worried about the baby. His side was matted with blood, not from the infant, but from his own wounds. In his desperate attempt to get someone's attention, he had torn himself raw trying to climb fences and scratch through underbrush. He had bled for this child without hesitation. Officer Daniels approached carefully, crouching beside Emily and the dog. "He's hurt bad," he said softly, as if trying not to scare either of them more. "We need to get him to a vet, fast." Emily nodded, wiping her tear-streaked face, feeling a fresh wave of guilt crash over her. She had been so focused on the baby that she hadn't noticed the silent hero bleeding at her side. A fierce determination sparked inside her, cutting through the fear and sorrow. She rose unsteadily to her feet, her arms protectively around her own belly. "I'm not leaving him," she whispered hoarsely, locking eyes with Officer Daniels. "Whatever happens, he's coming with me." It wasn't a question. It was a promise she hadn't known she needed to make until that moment. No one argued. Daniels simply nodded and scooped the injured dog into his arms as gently as possible. Emily followed close behind, limping toward the waiting ambulance, where the paramedics had finally gotten the baby's heart beating steadily again. The paramedic met Emily's eyes over the stretcher, giving her a small, broken smile. "You saved her," he said quietly. "You and that dog." As Emily climbed into the ambulance, the dog nestled against her side. Shaking but alive, she realized the weight she carried was no longer just the child growing inside her. It was the heavy, painful beauty of choosing to care when it would have been easier to look away. She pressed her forehead against the dog's muddy head and closed her eyes, feeling the ambulance lurch forward toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The night at the hospital passed in a haze of beeping monitors, whispered prayers, and endless waiting. Emily sat curled in a hard plastic chair, one hand resting on her belly, the other tangled in the dog's fur as he slept fitfully at her feet. Nurses passed by with soft smiles, offering blankets, coffee, and kind words she barely heard. Her heart stayed anchored to two fragile souls fighting silent battles for life. At sunrise, a pediatric nurse approached with cautious optimism shining in her eyes. "The baby's stable," she said softly, as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile miracle. Emily pressed her trembling hands to her mouth, sobbing into her palms with relief so profound it felt like pain. The dog thumped his tail weakly against the floor, as if sensing the shift in the air. Still, the dog's wounds were serious, and the vet working with the hospital warned Emily it wouldn't be easy. He had torn ligaments, deep cuts infected from days outside in the freezing rain, and a punctured paw that would need careful surgery. Emily didn't hesitate for a second. "Whatever it takes," she said fiercely, her voice steady. "He saved her. Now I save him." She spent the next week balancing hospital visits, prenatal appointments, and long hours sitting beside the dog's recovery kennel at the animal clinic. She learned his name was Max, from a faded old collar found tangled in his fur. No microchip, no owner, just a battered body and a spirit stubborn enough to defy death itself. Emily wasn't just fighting for him. She was fighting for herself too. Word of Emily's story spread through the small town like wildfire, reaching local news stations and even the evening national broadcasts. Donations poured in to help pay Max's medical bills, and strangers left notes and flowers at the hospital for the baby Emily had unofficially named Hope. Emily had spent so long feeling invisible, broken. Now, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. Despite the town's support, not everyone understood why Emily clung so fiercely to Max. Some whispered that a pregnant widow had no business taking on a mangy, half-dead dog. Others hinted that maybe it was guilt, loneliness, or simple desperation. Emily didn't bother explaining. Max had shown her a kind of loyalty no human ever had since her husband died, and that was enough. One afternoon, as Emily sat beside Max's kennel reading aloud from a baby book, he struggled to his feet for the first time. His legs wobbled, and he whimpered in pain, but he crossed the small space to press his nose against her swollen belly. Emily gasped, tears filling her eyes as she rested her hand on his head. It wasn't just recovery, it was a promise. They were healing together. When Hope was finally discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later, Emily insisted Max come home too, against every cautious warning from doctors and friends. She bundled Hope carefully into a second-hand crib set up in her tiny living room, and Max laid himself down beneath it like a silent, breathing guardian. That night, Emily watched them both sleep and felt something she hadn't dared to feel in months. Neighbors brought casseroles and tiny baby clothes. The local vet donated regular checkups for Max. A group of schoolchildren sent drawings of the hero dog that now hung proudly on Emily's fridge. Slowly, the little house filled with signs of life, of second chances. Emily no longer woke up gasping from nightmares. Instead, she awoke to Max's steady breathing and Hope's sleepy coos. One evening, as Emily rocked Hope on the porch and watched Max chase fireflies across the yard on 3 good legs, and one still healing, she realized the miracle wasn't that she had saved them, it was that they had saved her. All 3 of them were survivors, stitched together by loss, by hope, by the stubborn belief that love, in any form, was always worth fighting for. Spring arrived with a quiet kind of beauty, the kind Emily hadn't noticed in years. Hope giggled from her stroller as Max trotted proudly beside them during their daily walks, his limp barely noticeable now. Strangers often stopped to greet them, smiling at the sight of the unlikely little family stitched together by fate. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt the world offering her more than just grief. Every morning, Emily brewed a pot of coffee, fed Max, and sang softly to Hope as sunlight poured through the kitchen windows. Small, ordinary rituals that once seemed impossible now filled her days with meaning. Max would nudge Hope's stroller gently with his nose, eliciting peals of baby laughter that echoed through the house. It wasn't grand or perfect, but it was home. Emily decided she wanted to give back in the same way life had unexpectedly given to her. With the town's support, she started a small nonprofit to help rescue abandoned animals, naming it Hope's Paws. Max became the official mascot, his story inspiring others to open their homes and hearts. Every adoption day, Emily felt a new piece of herself heal as she watched other lonely souls find their missing piece. One chilly afternoon, Officer Daniels stopped by for a visit, dropping off a thick folder. Inside were finalized adoption papers. Emily was officially Hope's legal guardian. No more uncertainty, no more waiting. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she hugged Max tightly, her heart nearly bursting from the fierce, protective love she felt for both of them. There were still hard days, of course. Nights when Emily would stare at old photos of her late husband and wonder what he would think of their strange little family. But every time she faltered, Max was there, pressing his weight against her legs, reminding her that survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about choosing to love again, even when it hurt. Hope grew stronger every day, her tiny fingers constantly reaching for Max's tail, her laughter filling every empty corner of the house. Max, patient and steady, accepted every tug, every squeal, every sloppy kiss without flinching. They weren't just coexisting, they were healing each other in ways Emily could never have orchestrated on her own. The old fears still crept in sometimes. What if she wasn't enough? What if more loss was waiting just around the corner? But whenever those shadows loomed, Emily would look at Hope's bright eyes and Max's scarred but loyal body, and she would remember the truth. They had already survived the worst. Together, they could survive anything. At the town's summer fair, Emily was invited to share their story. Standing under the big white tent, holding Hope in one arm and resting her other hand on Max's head, she told a crowd of tearful faces how one cold night had changed everything. How a battered dog and a baby had taught her that love always finds a wave in the darkest woods. When she finished speaking, the entire crowd rose to their feet, the applause crashing over her like a tidal wave of warmth. Emily looked down at Max, who wagged his tail proudly, and at Hope, who clapped her tiny hands, unaware of the full weight of what they had overcome. And for the first time in forever, Emily allowed herself to believe she deserved this happiness. She hadn't just saved a baby. She hadn't just rescued a dog. She had saved herself. And somewhere deep in the woods that night, when everything seemed lost, Maybe a part of her had been reborn too fiercer, softer, and finally ready to live again.